When did saving my son's life mean destroying my own reputation? The hospital called at 11:32 p.m. on a Friday in October. My phone vibrated against the nightstand, and I grabbed it before the second ring, my heart already racing because hospitals don't call this late unless something terrible has happened. Dr. Patel's voice was steady but urgent. "Mr. Lawson, your son Daniel was admitted through the emergency room 20 minutes ago. He's in critical condition. You need to come immediately." I was dressed and in my car before my wife Lauren could finish asking what was wrong. Daniel was supposed to be at college 3 hours away, studying for midterms, not dying in some hospital. I drove through empty streets doing 80 where the limit was 45, my hands shaking on the wheel. Lauren called Daniel's roommate who said Daniel had collapsed during a party. Someone had called an ambulance. That was all he knew. I made it to Memorial Hospital in 19 minutes. The emergency room was fluorescent bright and smelled like antiseptic and fear. Dr. Patel met me in the waiting area, a thin woman in her 40s with exhausted eyes. She led me to a consultation room and closed the door. "Your son is in acute liver failure. We've stabilized him for now, but his condition is critical. He needs a transplant within 72 hours or he won't survive." I couldn't process the words. Daniel was 19 years old and healthy. He ran track. He didn't drink or do drugs. How does a healthy kid go into liver failure? Dr. Patel pulled up test results on her tablet. The toxicology screen shows high levels of acetaminophen in his system. Over 15 grams. That's more than 3 times the toxic dose. Did Daniel take pills? Was this a suicide attempt? No. Daniel wouldn't. He's happy. He loves school. There must be some mistake. The levels don't lie. This much acetaminophen doesn't accumulate by accident. Either he took a massive dose intentionally or someone gave it to him. I need to know which so we can properly treat him and report to the authorities. I told her I didn't know. I needed to see my son. She took me to the ICU. Daniel lay in a bed surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed. His skin had a yellow tinge I'd never seen before. Tubes ran from his arms. A ventilator helped him breathe. I stood there feeling my entire world collapse. Dr. Patel touched my shoulder. "We've listed him for emergency transplant, but the wait list is long. Even with his critical status, it could take weeks to find a match. He doesn't have weeks." "I know. That's why I'm asking if you've considered living donation. You could be tested as a potential donor." I didn't hesitate. "Test me. Whatever he needs, I'll give it." Dr. Patel nodded. "I'll have the transplant coordinator come talk to you. There's a process, medical evaluation, psychological screening, but we need to move fast." She left, and I sat with Daniel, holding his hand, watching his chest rise and fall, with mechanical precision. Lauren arrived 40 minutes later. She took one look at our son and started crying. I explained everything Dr. Patel had said: the liver failure, the acetaminophen poisoning, the need for emergency transplant. Lauren gripped my arm. "They think he tried to kill himself? I don't believe that. Neither do I, but the toxicology doesn't lie. Someone gave him those pills or he took them. We need to find out what happened." The transplant coordinator arrived at 1:15 a.m. Her name was Joyce Brennan, efficient and compassionate. She explained the living donor process. We'd need to verify I was a match, run extensive medical tests, psychological evaluation, legal consultation. The surgery was major. They'd remove a portion of my liver and transplant it into Daniel. Both of us would face significant recovery time and risk. I signed every consent form she handed me, started the blood type verification right there in the ICU. Joyce said they'd have preliminary results by morning. I spent the night in Daniel's room watching him breathe. Lauren dozed in a chair. Around 3 a.m., 2 police officers arrived. Detective Frank Garrison and his partner, Officer Nina Okoye. They needed to ask questions about Daniel's condition. We stepped into the hallway. Detective Garrison was maybe 50, with gray stubble and cold eyes. He asked about Daniel's mental state. Any signs of depression, suicidal ideation, drug use? I said no to everything. Daniel was doing well at school. He called home twice a week. He was excited about his classes. He had friends. He was happy. Detective Garrison wrote in his notebook. The hospital reported a possible suicide attempt. When someone ingests 15 grams of acetaminophen, that's not an accident. That's intentional self-harm. Unless someone gave it to him without his knowledge. Garrison's expression hardened. "You're suggesting what, exactly? Poisoning?" "I'm suggesting we don't know what happened yet. My son isn't suicidal. There has to be another explanation. Have you talked to his friends? The people at the party?" Officer Okoye said they'd interviewed several students. Everyone claimed Daniel had been drinking but acting normal. Then he suddenly collapsed. No one saw him take pills. No one admitted to giving him anything. Joyce found me at dawn with preliminary results. "You're a match. We can proceed with full medical evaluation today. I'll schedule everything. How long until we can do the surgery?" "If everything checks out, 3 days, maybe 4. Dr. Patel said Daniel had 72 hours. Every minute mattered. I told Joyce to schedule whatever she needed. Lauren went home to pack bags and make arrangements. I stayed with Daniel. Dr. Patel came by at 8 a.m. with more concerning news. "Daniel's liver enzymes are getting worse. His kidneys are starting to fail. We're doing everything we can to keep him stable, but his body is shutting down. We need that transplant immediately. Can't you move faster? There are protocols, safety checks. We can't rush this without risking both your lives. I understand you're desperate, but we have to follow procedure. Procedure felt meaningless when my son was dying. I called my office and told them I was taking emergency medical leave. I ran a pharmaceutical research company, Lawson Biomedical. We had 3 drugs in clinical trials and investors breathing down our necks. My absence would cause problems, but I didn't care. Nothing mattered except saving Daniel. The medical evaluation took all day. Blood tests, imaging scans, cardiovascular assessment, lung function. Doctors poked and prodded every part of me. The psychological screening was worse. A psychiatrist named Dr. Helen Worth asked probing questions about my motivations. Why do you want to donate? Are you being coerced? Do you understand the risks? I wanted to scream that my son was dying and her questions were wasting time, but I kept calm. Answered everything honestly. Yes, I understood the risks. Yes, I was certain. Yes, I was doing this of my own free will. Dr. Worth made notes and said she'd have her evaluation completed by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow felt like forever. I went back to Daniel's room and found Detective Garrison waiting. He needed to speak with me privately. We went to the consultation room again. Garrison pulled out his notebook. We've been investigating the circumstances around your son's poisoning. Talked to more students. Found some interesting information. Several people mentioned Daniel had been arguing with his girlfriend recently. Girl named Ashley Dunmore. They broke up 2 weeks ago. It wasn't amicable. That doesn't mean anything. Breakups happen. Young people are dramatic. Garrison continued. Ashley told us Daniel had been depressed about the breakup. Said he'd been drinking more, skipping classes. She was worried about him. That's not true. Daniel never mentioned being depressed. He never mentioned any of this. Maybe he didn't want to worry you. Or maybe Ashley's lying to cover something up. What would she be covering up? I don't know, but my son didn't try to kill himself. I know him. Garrison closed his notebook. Mr. Lawson, I understand this is difficult, but all evidence points to suicide attempt. The amount of acetaminophen, the circumstances, the statements from people who knew him. We're going to close this as self-harm unless something concrete emerges to suggest otherwise. You can't just close it. Someone poisoned him. You need to investigate. We did investigate. There's no evidence of foul play. I'm sorry about your son. I hope he recovers. Garrison left. I sat there furious and helpless. They were giving up, deciding Daniel's near death was his own fault without actually finding the truth. I pulled out my phone and started calling Daniel's friends myself. Left messages for his roommate, his track teammates, people I remembered him mentioning. Someone had to know what really happened at that party. Joyce found me that evening with more paperwork. The ethics committee needs to review your case. It's standard procedure for living donation, especially emergency situations. They want to ensure there's no coercion or inappropriate pressure. When do they meet? Monday morning. That's 3 days from now. Daniel might not have 3 days. I'll push for an expedited review, but they have to follow their process. I wanted to overturn tables, wanted to grab the transplant coordinator and make her understand that bureaucracy was killing my son. But I stayed calm, asked what else I could do. Joyce said to rest and stay healthy. They needed me in optimal condition for surgery. Lauren returned that night with clothes and toiletries. She'd talked to Daniel's academic advisor who confirmed he'd been attending classes regularly and performing well. No signs of mental health crisis, no indication he was struggling. That directly contradicted what Ashley had told police. I mentioned this to Lauren. She suggested we talk to Ashley ourselves, find out why she was lying. We tracked down Ashley's phone number through Daniel's contacts and called her. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice wary. Who is this? Daniel's father. We need to talk about what you told police. There was a long pause. I don't have anything to say. You told them Daniel was depressed and drinking heavily. That's not true. Why would you lie? I wasn't lying. Daniel was messed up after we broke up. Maybe you just didn't see it because he was at school. Or maybe you're covering for something. Did you give him those pills, Ashley? Her voice went sharp. Are you accusing me of trying to kill him? I'm trying to understand what happened to my son. She hung up. I tried calling back, but she didn't answer. Lauren said we should hire a private investigator, someone who could actually dig into what happened at that party. I agreed and started making calls. Found an investigator named Ray Torres who specialized in campus incidents. He agreed to take the case and start immediately. The ethics committee met Monday morning in a conference room on the hospital's 4th floor. 5 people sat around a table reviewing my medical files and psychological evaluation. I sat across from them, feeling like I was on trial. The committee chair, Dr. Gerald Sutton, asked why I wanted to donate. I gave him the same answers I'd given everyone else. Daniel was my son. I'd do anything to save him. I understood the risks. I was mentally competent and physically healthy. Dr. Sutton asked about my work. You run a pharmaceutical company? Yes, Lawson Biomedical. We do drug development and clinical research. Any current trials that require your direct involvement? 3 trials in various phases. My team can manage without me during recovery. One committee member, a lawyer named Patricia Vance, asked about financial motivation. Would there be any financial benefit to, you if Daniel survives or dies? I stared at her. What kind of question is that? We need to ensure there's no conflict of interest. Life insurance policies, inheritance issues, business arrangements. Nothing. Daniel surviving benefits no one except Daniel, and his mother, and everyone who loves him. Patricia made notes. Another committee member asked about my relationship with Daniel. Any conflicts? Any reason I might harbor resentment? I wanted to walk out. Wanted to tell them all to go to hell while my son died waiting for their approval. But I swallowed my rage and answered calmly. Daniel and I had a normal father-son relationship. We were close. I loved him. I wanted him to live. The questions continued for 90 minutes. Finally, Dr. Sutton said they'd deliberate and have a decision by end of day. Ray Torres called while I was waiting. He'd been on campus asking questions. Found a student named Kevin Chen who'd been at the party. Chen remembered seeing Ashley giving Daniel drinks, multiple drinks throughout the night. She'd been very attentive, making sure his cup stayed full. That aligned with poisoning far more than suicide. I asked if Chen would talk to police. Torres said he'd try to convince him. I went back to Daniel's ICU room. His condition had worsened. Dr. Patel said his kidneys were failing faster than expected. They'd started dialysis. His brain was showing signs of hepatic encephalopathy from the liver failure. We're running out of time. If the ethics committee doesn't approve today, we'll need to consider other options. What other options? There are experimental treatments, artificial liver support systems. They're not proven, but they might buy us more time. Do whatever you need to do. Dr. Patel left to make arrangements. Lauren arrived with coffee and fear in her eyes. She'd been reading about acetaminophen poisoning. The survival rate without transplant was less than 30%. With successful transplant, it jumped to 90%. Everything depended on that committee's decision. Joyce found us at 4 p.m. The committee approved your donation. We're scheduling surgery for tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Both of you need to start prep immediately. Relief flooded through me, so intense I nearly collapsed. Tomorrow morning, 17 hours. Daniel just had to survive 17 more hours. The surgical team moved fast. They admitted me to a room down the hall from Daniel, started IV fluids and medications. A surgeon named Dr. Philip Osei came by to explain the procedure. They'd remove the right lobe of my liver, about 60% of the organ. My liver would regenerate over several months. The surgery would take 8 to 10 hours. Recovery would be painful and difficult. There were risks of bleeding, infection, bile leaks, liver failure. I could die on the table. I signed more consent forms. Dr. Osei left and I tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. My mind kept racing through everything that had happened. The poisoning, Ashley's lies, the detectives' rush to judgment, the bureaucratic delays. Every system that should have helped had instead created obstacles. Ray Torres called at 11 p.m. with an update. He'd convinced Kevin Chen to talk to Detective Garrison. Chen had given a formal statement about seeing Ashley giving Daniel drinks. Torres had also found another witness, a girl named Jennifer Lopez, who remembered Ashley bragging about getting revenge on Daniel for dumping her. Torres had recorded the interview, had solid evidence this was intentional poisoning, not suicide. I called Detective Garrison immediately, told him about the new witnesses. He needed to arrest Ashley before she disappeared or destroyed evidence. Garrison sounded annoyed. Mr. Lawson, I appreciate your concern, but we've already classified this case. I'm not reopening an investigation based on hearsay from college kids. This isn't hearsay. These are witnesses who saw Ashley poisoning my son. Ray Torres has recordings. You need to listen to them. I'll review the information, but I'm not making promises. If there's actual evidence, we'll follow up. He hung up. I wanted to scream, wanted to drive to Ashley's dorm and drag her to the police station myself, but I was hours away from surgery. I had to stay calm, stay healthy, keep my body in optimal condition to save Daniel. Lauren stayed with me through the night. Neither of us slept. We talked about Daniel as a child, his first steps, his first day of school, the time he broke his arm falling out of a tree and cried more about missing his baseball game than the pain. We'd raised a good kid, a kind, thoughtful person who didn't deserve any of this. At 5 a.m., nurses came to prep me for surgery. They gave me medications and wheeled me to the pre-op area. Dr. Osei stopped by one final time. You're doing an incredibly brave thing. We're going to take excellent care of both of you. I was wheeled into the operating room at 6:03 a.m. The space was cold and blindingly bright. People in surgical gowns moved around preparing instruments. An anesthesiologist introduced herself and explained what would happen. I'd go to sleep and wake up in recovery. Everything would be fine. She placed a mask over my face and told me to breathe deeply. I thought about Daniel, about giving him part of myself so he could live, about how far I'd go to protect my child. The world faded to black. I woke up to pain. Searing, absolute pain radiating from my abdomen through my entire body. Someone was talking, but I couldn't focus on the words. Everything was blurry and wrong. I tried to sit up and hands pushed me back down. A nurse's face appeared above me. Mr. Lawson, stay still. The surgery went well. You're in recovery. You need to rest. Where's Daniel? He's in surgery now. Dr. Patel is transplanting your liver into him. It's going to take several more hours. Rest now. They gave me more medication, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. When I finally woke fully, it was dark outside. Lauren sat in a chair beside my bed. She smiled when she saw me open my eyes. "You're awake. How do you feel?" I felt terrible. Every breath hurt. My stomach felt like it had been torn open. I asked about Daniel. He made it through surgery. Dr. Patel said the transplant went well. He's in ICU under heavy sedation, but his new liver is functioning. They think he's going to survive. Tears ran down Lauren's face. "You saved him. You saved our son." The relief was overwhelming, but brief. A few minutes later, hospital security entered my room. 2 guards and a man in a suit who introduced himself as Gerald Krantz, hospital legal counsel. "Mr. Lawson, we need to discuss a serious matter." Krantz pulled out a tablet. "We've been contacted by the state medical board. There's been an allegation that you coerced the ethics committee into approving your donation by withholding material information." "What are you talking about?" "The medical board received an anonymous complaint claiming you failed to disclose a conflict of interest. Specifically, that your pharmaceutical company stands to lose substantial investor funding if you're unable to work, and that Daniel's death would allow you to claim life insurance while avoiding personal bankruptcy." "None of that is true. I don't have life insurance on Daniel. My company is financially stable. This is insane." Krantz's expression remained neutral. "The medical board is opening an investigation. They've also contacted the district attorney's office. There are questions about whether your donation was legally obtained under false pretenses. Who filed this complaint?" "That's confidential, but you need to understand the seriousness of the allegations. If the medical board finds you provided false information to the ethics committee, your donation could be classified as medical fraud. They could pursue criminal charges." "This is ridiculous. I saved my son's life." "You may have violated federal and state laws governing organ donation." Krantz left. I lay there stunned. Someone was trying to destroy me for saving Daniel. Someone had filed a false complaint making me look like a criminal. The timing was too convenient. The accusations too specific. Ashley. It had to be Ashley. She'd failed to kill Daniel, so now she was trying to destroy me. Lauren was furious. "They can't do this. You almost died to save our son. They can't accuse you of fraud. We need a lawyer. A good one." I called my company's legal counsel, Theodore Marsh, explained the situation. Theo said he'd refer me to a criminal defense attorney who specialized in medical cases. Within 2 hours, I was on the phone with Diana Reeves, a sharp-voiced woman who got straight to business. "These allegations are serious. Medical fraud related to organ donation can carry federal prison time. But they're completely false. I disclosed everything required. The ethics committee approved my donation. Someone clearly wants to discredit you. We need to figure out who and why. Then we need to prove the allegations are baseless. I'll file motions to get the complaint unsealed so we can see exactly what was said." I told her about Ashley, about the poisoning evidence Ray Torres had gathered, about Detective Garrison's refusal to investigate. Diana said she'd look into all of it. But right now, we needed to focus on defending me against the medical board. She'd request all documentation from the ethics committee review. We'd prove I'd been truthful. The next days were a blur of pain and legal chaos. I was recovering from major surgery while fighting accusations that could send me to prison. Daniel remained sedated in ICU, unaware that saving his life had made me a target. Ray Torres called with more evidence. He'd found Ashley's roommate, who admitted Ashley had been planning to hurt Daniel for weeks. The roommate had screenshots of text messages where Ashley discussed crushing pills and putting them in drinks. Torres had sent everything to Detective Garrison, who finally seemed to be paying attention. 2 days after my surgery, police arrested Ashley Dunmore on charges of attempted murder and poisoning. The news made regional headlines. College student arrested for poisoning ex-boyfriend. I felt vindictive satisfaction watching her get led away in handcuffs. But Ashley's arrest triggered another problem. Her father was Roger Dunmore, a prominent personal injury lawyer with political connections. Roger immediately went on local news claiming his daughter was being scapegoated, that Daniel had clearly tried to commit suicide, and the Lawson family was using Ashley as a convenient scapegoat to avoid the stigma. He suggested I'd pressured the ethics committee because I needed Daniel alive for business reasons. The allegations from the medical board complaint suddenly made sense. Roger had filed it. He was trying to shift blame away from Ashley by destroying my credibility. Diana Reeves called it a classic legal strategy. Muddy the waters. Make the victim's family look suspicious. Create reasonable doubt for when Ashley goes to trial. We need to be aggressive. Prove beyond question that you acted ethically and that Ashley acted criminally. The medical board investigation moved forward. I was required to give a deposition while still recovering from surgery. Diana accompanied me to a conference room where 3 board members and an attorney questioned me for 4 hours. They asked about my finances, my business, my relationship with Daniel, every detail of the ethics committee process. Diana objected to half their questions as irrelevant and invasive, but I answered everything anyway. I had nothing to hide. The board's attorney, a man named Gordon Price, was particularly hostile. "Isn't it true your company lost 2 major investors last quarter?" "Yes, but that's normal in pharmaceutical development. Investors come and go." "Isn't it Also true that you're personally liable for certain company debts under your funding agreements? Only in specific bankruptcy scenarios that aren't remotely applicable. Price pulled out financial documents. Your company's burn rate suggests you'll need additional funding within 6 months. Losing work time due to Daniel's death would have been devastating to your business prospects. I never thought about business when Daniel was dying. I thought about saving my son. Price wasn't convinced. You expect us to believe you didn't consider the financial implications? You're a businessman. You think in terms of costs and benefits? I'm also a father. That comes first. Always. The deposition ended with no clear resolution. Diana said we'd need to wait for the board's decision. Meanwhile, Ashley's trial was scheduled for 3 months away. Detective Garrison had built a solid case. The witnesses Torres found, the text messages, the toxicology showing deliberate poisoning. Ashley's lawyer was already trying to negotiate a plea deal, but Roger Dunmore refused. He wanted a trial, wanted to put us through public scrutiny. Daniel woke up 2 weeks after the transplant. I was there when his eyes finally opened. He looked confused and weak, but alive. Dad? I'm here, son. You're going to be okay. What happened? You were poisoned. You needed a liver transplant. I gave you part of mine. His eyes filled with tears. You saved me. Of course I did. That's what fathers do. Daniel's recovery progressed slowly. He had to relearn basic functions, had to take immunosuppressant drugs to prevent rejection, had to attend physical therapy and medical appointments. But he was alive and getting stronger every day. I was recovering too, though my surgical wound still hurt and my energy levels were minimal. I'd lost 30 pounds, looked gaunt and exhausted. My company's board was getting anxious about my extended absence. Our lead drug trial was approaching critical data milestones. Investors wanted updates I couldn't provide. My vice president, Leonard Wu, called weekly with increasingly urgent questions. When are you coming back? The investors are getting nervous. They're talking about pulling funding if you're not actively managing the trials. I had major surgery. I'm recovering. I understand, but we have contractual obligations. If we miss these deadlines, we lose everything. We've worked 10 years building this company. Tell them I'll be back as soon as medically cleared. Leonard sighed. I'm trying to hold things together, but it's falling apart without you. That call highlighted the accusation Roger Dunmore had made. My company did need me. My absence was causing real financial damage. But that didn't mean I'd considered business when deciding to save Daniel. The two things weren't related, yet the medical board seemed focused on finding connections. Diana called with bad news. The board is leaning toward sanctions. They think you should have disclosed more detailed financial information during the ethics review. Even if it wasn't directly relevant, they believe the committee should have known about your company's situation. That's absurd. My company's finances have nothing to do with donating to my son. I agree, but they're taking a cautious approach. They don't want to set a precedent where donors can hide potential conflicts of interest. What kind of sanctions are we talking about? Could range from a formal reprimand to referring criminal charges to the district attorney. We need to fight this hard. Diana filed motions challenging the board's jurisdiction and arguing the investigation was retaliatory. We scheduled a formal hearing where I could present my defense. Ashley's trial began in January, 3 months after she poisoned Daniel. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. Roger Dunmore had hired an expensive defense team, led by a famous attorney named Carolyn Vasquez. Ashley sat at the defense table looking young and innocent in a conservative dress. The prosecution presented their case over 5 days. Kevin Chen testified about seeing Ashley giving Daniel drinks. Jennifer Lopez testified about Ashley's revenge comments. Forensic experts explained how the acetaminophen was administered. Toxicologists walked through the poisoning timeline. Daniel testified via video link from home, still too weak to appear in person. He described the party, remembered Ashley being friendly, offering him drinks, insisting he relax and have fun. He didn't remember taking any pills. The last thing he recalled was feeling dizzy and then waking up in the hospital. Carolyn Vasquez cross-examined aggressively. Isn't it true you and Ashley had a difficult breakup? Yes. Isn't it true you'd been drinking heavily that night? I had a few beers. Could you have taken pills without remembering? No, I don't take pills. I would never take that many pills. But you were drinking. Your memory could be impaired. My memory is fine. Ashley gave me drinks all night. She did this. Vasquez tried to paint Daniel as depressed and suicidal, brought in Ashley's friends who testified that Daniel had seemed unstable, that he'd been crying about the breakup, that he'd made comments about not wanting to live. All lies, but presented under oath. The prosecution countered with Daniel's academic advisor, his roommate, his track coach. Everyone testified he'd been happy and healthy, no signs of mental health crisis. The text messages from Ashley's phone were the most damning evidence. Dozens of messages to friends discussing how she was going to make Daniel suffer, how she'd crush pills into powder, how she'd make sure he drank enough to get sick. The messages were specific and premeditated. Carolyn Vasquez argued the messages were taken out of context, that Ashley had been venting emotionally but never intended actual harm, that the pills must have been taken by Daniel himself. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I sat in the courtroom waiting, my surgical wound still aching. Lauren gripped my hand. Daniel watched from home via video link. When the jury returned, the forewoman stood. On the count of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of poisoning, we find the defendant guilty. Ashley collapsed into sobs. Roger Dunmore's face went red with fury. The judge set sentencing for 4 weeks later. I felt relief, but no satisfaction. Ashley would go to prison, but the damage was done. Daniel had nearly died. I'd been forced to give up part of my liver. Our family had been torn apart by accusations and investigations, and I still faced the medical board hearing. That hearing took place 2 weeks after Ashley's conviction. Diana Reeves presented our defense in a conference room at the medical board headquarters. She argued I'd disclosed everything required by the ethics committee, that my company's financial situation was irrelevant to my decision to donate, that the anonymous complaint filed by Roger Dunmore was retaliatory and baseless. We brought financial experts who testified my company was stable despite investor concerns. We brought ethics experts who said the committee had asked appropriate questions and I'd answered truthfully. We brought character witnesses, including my company's board members, who said I'd never prioritized business over family. The medical board attorney, Gordon Price, argued that full disclosure required mentioning any circumstance that could create even appearance of conflict, that I should have volunteered information about my company's challenges, that the committee deserved complete transparency. Diana countered that such a standard was impossible. Every person has complex financial situations. Requiring disclosure of every remotely related detail would make donation prohibitively complicated. The board deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the chair, Dr. Patricia Feng, delivered their decision. We find that Mr. Lawson disclosed sufficient information during the ethics review process. However, we believe he should have provided more detail about his professional circumstances. We're issuing a formal letter of concern that will be placed in his file. No further sanctions or referrals to law enforcement. A letter of concern. Not exoneration, but not criminal charges either. A permanent mark on my record suggesting I'd done something questionable, even though I'd saved my son's life. Diana said we could appeal the letter, but it would mean more legal battles and more public scrutiny. I decided to accept it and move on. Ashley's sentencing happened in March. The judge heard victim impact statements. Lauren spoke about watching Daniel almost die, about the terror of not knowing if he'd survive, about the violation of trust. Daniel spoke via video, describing the ongoing medical challenges, the immunosuppressant drugs, the monitoring, appointments, the knowledge that someone he'd cared about had tried to kill him. I spoke about the impossible choice I'd faced, about undergoing major surgery, about being accused of fraud for saving my son, about how Ashley's actions had rippled through our entire lives. The judge sentenced Ashley to 18 years in prison with possibility of parole after 12. Roger Dunmore shouted that it was excessive, that his daughter was being punished too harshly because we'd manipulated the system. The judge ordered him removed from the courtroom. I returned to work in April, 8 months after Daniel's poisoning. Leonard Wu greeted me with relief and anxiety. The company had barely survived my absence. 2 investors had pulled out. 1 drug trial had been delayed. We were operating on minimal funding. I threw myself back into work, trying to rebuild what had been damaged, but my reputation had been destroyed. Industry colleagues had read about the medical board investigation, about accusations I'd coerced the ethics committee, about suggestions I'd prioritized business over ethics. Nobody seemed to remember I'd been cleared. They only remembered the allegations. Funding meetings became difficult. Potential investors asked pointed questions about my judgment, about whether I could be trusted to run a company ethically, about the letter of concern in my medical board file. One investor said directly that he couldn't back a CEO who'd been investigated for medical fraud, regardless of the outcome. Our lead drug showed promising results in trials, but we couldn't secure funding to continue development. By summer, Lawson Biomedical was struggling to survive. The company I'd spent 15 years building was dying because I'd saved my son. Leonard suggested I step down as CEO. Let someone else take over leadership while remaining on the board. It would distance the company from the controversy surrounding you. The board agreed. In August, I resigned as CEO of the company I'd founded, took a board position with minimal involvement, watched someone else run the organization I'd created. The local business journal ran a story about my resignation. Pharmaceutical executive steps down following organ donation controversy. The article mentioned the medical board investigation, the fraud allegations, my damaged reputation. Barely mentioned that I'd saved my son's life or that Ashley had been convicted of attempted murder. I became a cautionary tale, the father who'd sacrificed everything and lost everything. People whispered about whether it had been worth it, whether I regretted my choice. Daniel graduated from college 2 years later. He'd transferred to a school closer to home, completed his degree in biology, got accepted to medical school. At his graduation, he gave a speech thanking everyone who'd supported him. He mentioned me specifically. My father gave me part of his liver and sacrificed his career to save my life. He lost his reputation defending me. He became a target for doing what any parent would do. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor that sacrifice by helping others. The audience applauded. Lauren squeezed my hand. Daniel was alive and thriving. He'd found purpose in his near-death experience. He wanted to become a transplant surgeon, to give others the second chance I'd given him. That's what mattered. Not my lost company or damaged reputation or the letter in my medical board file. Roger Dunmore died of a heart attack when Ashley was 6 years into her sentence. She blamed my family for his death, claimed the stress of her trial had killed him. She wrote letters from prison saying we'd destroyed her life and her father's life over an accident. I never responded. Diana Reeves called occasionally with updates. Ashley's parole requests were consistently denied. The parole board considered her lack of remorse. Jennifer Lopez had become a victim advocate, speaking about campus safety and relationship violence. Kevin Chen had graduated and was working in public health. The witnesses who'd come forward had moved on with their lives while Ashley remained incarcerated. I found consulting work helping smaller pharmaceutical companies with drug development. The pay was modest compared to running my own company, but it kept me connected to the field I loved. Some companies wouldn't hire me because of my reputation. Others valued my expertise and experience. I built a quiet career away from the spotlight I'd once occupied. Daniel started medical school and excelled. He called weekly to update me on his classes, his rotations, his growing passion for transplant medicine. He'd found his calling in the trauma that had nearly killed him. Lauren and I grew closer through everything we'd endured. The crisis had tested our marriage but ultimately strengthened it. We'd faced the worst together and survived. 5 years after the transplant, Daniel invited me to a medical school presentation. He was giving a talk about living donation and transplant ethics. I sat in the audience as he presented our case study. He described the poisoning, the emergency transplant, the ethical review, the legal battles. He presented it as an example of how the system can fail families in crisis, how bureaucracy can obstruct mercy, how reputation can be destroyed for doing the right thing. His conclusion was simple. Ethics committees need better protections for donors acting in good faith. Anonymous complaints should be investigated before becoming public. Medical boards should consider context, not just technical disclosure rules. The system should protect people who save lives, not punish them. The audience of medical students and faculty asked questions. One professor asked if I regretted the donation. Daniel answered before I could. My father saved my life. Everything he lost, he'd lose again to save me. That's not something you regret. That's called love. Ashley was released on parole after serving 14 years. She moved to another state and changed her name. I heard she was working at a retail store, living quietly, avoiding publicity. She never apologized directly to Daniel or our family, never acknowledged what she'd done beyond the guilty verdict. Daniel said he'd forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his own. Holding on to anger would poison him worse than acetaminophen ever could. He'd chosen to focus on helping others instead of hating his attacker. I tried to follow his example, but forgiveness came harder. I still felt rage at what she'd done, still felt bitter about losing my company and my reputation, still resented the system that had investigated me for saving my son. But Daniel's success made it bearable. On the 10-year anniversary of the transplant, Daniel passed his transplant surgery boards. He sent me a photo of his certification with a message. Because of you, I'm alive. Because of what you sacrificed, I can now save others. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. I framed that message and hung it in my home office next to a photo from his medical school graduation. Reminders that when faced with an impossible choice, when saving my son meant destroying my reputation, I'd made the right decision. The only decision. The world might remember me as the executive who fell from grace, the father investigated for medical fraud, the cautionary tale about conflicts of interest. But Daniel remembered me as the father who gave him life twice, once at birth, once on an operating table. That was the reputation that mattered. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.